Hello, I'm coming to you sick. I feel like that does not need to be said. I'll promise you that I won't make any gross sick noises in this video, but I can't promise you that I'm not going to sound really, really congested. I'm sorry. I never get sick. I haven't been sick in years. I mean, like a cold. My thyroid tried to kill me for like a year straight, but I haven't gotten a cold since like 2019. So I'm feeling really miserable about this, but I am at the tail end of it now. Thank God. This video, I'm setting out to read a bunch of books that have unlikable characters. I love a hateable narrator. I really, really enjoy disliking the person that I'm reading about. And so I'm excited for most of these, not two of them. And I'm not going to promise you that I'm going to read all 5 of these books. I'm going to try really hard to read 4 of them. I'm not sure which 4 yet. So we'll go through them. I think that some of these are really obvious choices. I think all of these are actually really obvious choices for books with unlikable characters. Up on the top, and the first one that I'm going to read is Tampa by Alissa Nutting. This, to the best of my knowledge, is about a middle school teacher who grooms one of her students. I think this is her justifying her... I'm not going to say deviancy, because that really sounds like a fucking dog whistle. I think this is about her, like, justifying her behaviors and the harm that she causes, and also, like, doing a whole bunch of things to get away with this. So I think it's tense in the way that, like, she always could be caught. And it's like, she's the narrator, so you want the story to keep going, so you don't want her to get caught, but also you hate her and everything that she stands for, so you do want her to get caught. Kind of in the way that Yellowface is. This book just really gets into the head of a horrible, disturbing character, and I'm so excited about it. I've heard that the writing is really good, and it's just such a singular and, like, brave work to cover this really, like, awful and taboo topic. I'm starting with this and thrilled about it. Okay, in a completely different vein, we then have The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. I'm not American, despite people accusing me of that sometimes in my comment section. I am Canadian. I was not forced to read this in high school. I thought to throw this in here because I think it's like one of the classics of unlikable narrators. I think that this book is what a lot of people think of when you say insufferable character. Am I that interested in reading this book? No. Not really at all. So I'm also not really that interested in reading the next book, which is Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. I haven't read any Murakami. I feel like I should. So I'm going to say I'm going to read one of these books. Probably not both of them. I don't think I have the willpower or discipline to do that. I'll probably read the first 50 pages of both and then decide. I don't know what this is about, and because it is so old and so famous, there's no summary on the back. I think this is an absolutely beautiful cover. I love this cover. I know people who have read this book and hated it, which there's a lot of you out there, probably can't appreciate the beauty of this cover, but like the typeface, the colors, I think it's gorgeous. Do you think there's a summary on the inside? No. I guess I could look up what The Catcher in the Rye is about. I think it's about an annoying teenager. That's really all I know. And I'm sure if I look up a summary, it'll say exactly that. Then Norwegian Wood, I think that's about an annoying college student, and he grows up. And he's a misogynist. I kind of think this is like a love story. I don't know, should I read the back? In my head. It's a coming-of-age story steeped in nostalgia, blending the music, mood, and ethos that were the 60s with a young man's hopeless and heroic first love. I wish I cared. This is like such like straight literary fiction. I want things that are more interesting than that right now, so I don't know if I'm going to pick that up. But I do know that I'm going to read Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. I'm so thrilled about this. I look for this book everywhere. My library has every book ever written. I can't believe that this wasn't there. And then I also couldn't find it at my favorite big used bookstore, which broke my heart because I don't like buying books new, and I almost never do. I can't remember the last time I bought a book new because I can get everything at the library. This has been nowhere. It wasn't even at Indigo. But then my roommate was so nice, I think because I was sick, he went to 2 bookstores, and he found it at one of them, and he bought it for me. And I'm so excited about this. This is about an insufferable woman, and she's a horrible person, and she takes photos, sexually explicit photographs of average-looking men. And I think she takes advantage of them, and I think that she's just awful, and I think this book is so good. Everybody says it's so good, and I think also I'm really, really hyping it up because I couldn't find it anywhere. I read Penance by Eliza Clark, and I thought the storytelling was great, and I thought that she was a really good writer. I think that this book is more up my alley than Penance was, and Penance was like 4 stars for me. Then finally we have A Touch of Jen by Beth Morgan, which is, to the best of my knowledge, about 2 people in a relationship, and they're obsessed with another woman who's maybe like a social media influencer. Let's read the inside cover. Oh my god, I'm so right about everything. A young couple's toxic Instagram crush spins out of control and unleashes a sinister creature in this twisted, cinematic, and viciously funny debut. This sounds fun. I think that everybody in this book sucks. I think that they're all terrible. I obviously don't know that. I haven't even opened this book. So don't go in the comments correcting me because I haven't read the goddamn book. I'm sorry. That was really defensive for no reason. I think that the concept of this, of two people in a relationship who are both obsessed with the same person, fascinating. I'm so interested in this and I'm really excited to read it. I think that it's funny, which can be iffy. And when a book tries to be funny, you really got to have the same sense of humor as the author. And I find that that's maybe more of a generational thing, and I doubt that this author is 24 years old. So I think these three are going to be really compelling, and I think that the other two, I'm probably not going to be that interested in. Maybe Norwegian Wood will be really good writing. I've read like the first 20 pages, and I thought it was a bit boring. But that's because I've been reading horror books lately, and that's really what I'm into right now. I kind of want to read things that are fast-paced and gruesome and weird. And I don't think Norwegian Wood is going to be any of those. And I also don't think Catcher in the Rye is going to be any of those. But I'm going to read more of Tampa. I've read like 2 pages of it. I mean, it's crazy so far. I think this is going to be great. And I'm excited to read it. And I'll check in with you once I've read more of it. Sometimes I sit down to film and I'm like, how did I ever do this any other time? Like, I don't know how to talk. How have I ever successfully spoken about anything? Okay, I'm here to give you a little update about Tampa. I just got to a part that made me feel so incredibly tense and anxious that I had to get up and walk away and like clean my room. It's stressing me the fuck out, so instead of reading, which I'm afraid to do, I'm going to tell you about what is happening so far. So as much as I'm really vehemently against advertising companies censoring us, I am going to have to tread a little bit lightly with this because I feel like talking about this book in detail is the quickest way to get my channel removed from this platform. So I worry that in talking about this while also trying to play it a little bit safe, it's going to seem like I'm not fully condemning this woman. And I am, and if I was talking to you in real life, it would be a very different story with the language that I use. I hope that makes sense. I'm kind of really like beating around the bush here. Tampa is about a woman who becomes a middle school teacher with the express purpose of grooming 14-year-old boys. That is the purpose of her entire life, and everything she does comes down to this one point. This book starts with her starting her very first day teaching middle schoolers. Almost the entire first half of this book is really just her fantasizing, and it's disgusting and horrible and gross, but it's not necessarily like sickening in the way that you might expect it to be based off of the summary, because it is so abstract. These boys are not fully realized human beings. They are just sexual objects to her. Of course that's gross, but it's a lot less gross than when you can really see the boys as people. But then she enters into a real relationship with this boy that she has pinpointed as essentially the perfect victim. Someone who will go along with it, but also not tell anyone. She is very methodical in her planning on this. She like knows what she wants and she knows exactly how to get it. And it's not that she ever justifies it. Like, she knows that this is wrong. She knows that this is bad. She just doesn't care because all that matters to Celeste is what she wants. And she'll do anything to get what she wants. She'll push aside everything else in her life. What's really interesting about Celeste is that she is this very immature character, obviously sexually, but also kind of emotionally. Like, she thinks that middle school boys want what middle school girls think that middle school boys want, if that makes sense. Like, she has this whole plan where she has her hair tied up with a pencil on the first day. She's not going to take it out with the pencil until she finds the perfect boy. And then she does. Like, that's what a 13-year-old girl thinks boys want. You know what I mean? But at the same time, intellectually, she's so smart and so methodical that it's this very strange contrast in her psyche. What stands out the most in this book is the writing. This is some of the best writing I have ever read in my entire life. And I think that to write this book, it had to be. I think there's no way this would have been published if it wasn't absolutely impeccably written, which it is. The writing almost is making it harder to read than the subject matter because it's so like rich and decadent. It's like eating a cheesecake. Like, I can only handle a few bites. I feel like Every sentence is so deliberately chosen. All of the words are so perfectly placed that you have to read it very slowly. There's also an interesting exploration of beauty in this. Celeste can get away with whatever she wants because she's hot. Jack, the boy that she has groomed, his dad catches them in his house, but she gets away with it. Like, she blows it off and pretends that she's tutoring him. And this is because Jack's dad finds her attractive. And then she kind of starts this half relationship with Jack's dad so that she has an excuse to be at their house all the time. And the part that I've gotten up to now, I can see from the start of this chapter, it starts with, "It was a situation we couldn't have foreseen." And then at the very bottom of the page, which my eyes immediately skipped to because that freaked me out, when Buck, Jack's dad, when Buck's figure rounded the doorway, he saw the disheveled appearance of Jack's clothing, my pants hanging open, unbuttoned, and unzipped. I am so scared to read what happens next, because there's still a good chunk of this book. I think that this is going to seem like it will be her comeuppance, and that she will continue to get away with it because of her attractiveness. I think that a Buck's, again, going to blow it off, and I am so anxious to read it, but so excited to read it, because it is so perfectly written, and it's such a fascinating look inside this monstrous woman's head. I always think it's interesting, I think I mentioned this before, about books like this where I want her to pay for her crimes. Like, I want terrible things to happen to this woman, but I don't want the story to end. There's this conflict between my morals and my, like, want of a good story, I guess, or want to continue with this entertainment, my enjoyment of the writing. So good. But, oh my god, it's so fucking dark. And it has definitely become more, like, I feel kind of sick to my stomach reading it now that Jack is being humanized. There's this part where they're talking, and he's talking about looking up at the stars in the sky and feeling overwhelmed. It's just sad, because obviously it's coming from her perspective, so he's never portrayed as a victim, and she really convinces herself that he's not a victim. So, like, really be careful with this, but I already know that I'm gonna give this book at least 4.5 stars. Unless something, like, crazy stupid happens, this is some of the best writing that has ever existed. Okay, I'm gonna go try to read it, but, like, I'm so scared I genuinely might not. Like, I might have to put it down for a couple of days. I've finished Tampa. 5-star read. Spoilers incoming. I'm gonna tell you what happens in the last half of it. Okay, so the dad comes in while they are very clearly having sex. They manage to cover up, but, like, her pants are unzipped. It's obvious. But he desperately needs to overlook this. He needs something else to have happened. So she just, like, kind of seduces him and ends up having sex with him to make him forget what he's just seen. And he does forget. He overlooks it, and it's so frustrating because you want him to explode on them. You want her to face her consequences, and she doesn't, because she's attractive and she manages to seduce this kid's dad. So she once again gets away with it. And as the book progresses, as their relationship progresses and they keep getting away with more and more, they become a little bit more lax on things, until finally, one day, Jack's dad, Buck, fully walks in on them in the act. And he immediately leaves and starts wailing, and she tells Jack to stay there, and she goes to see what's up with Buck, try to somehow convince him not to call the police. And she realizes that Buck is having a heart attack. They have caused him to have a heart attack, and she sits there and watches him die. This fucks Jack's whole life up, of course, but particularly because his mom and dad are divorced, and his mom lives a few hours away in a completely different town. So he has to leave his school and go live with his mom and her husband and his stepbrothers. And Celeste doesn't give a fuck. Even in the moments where she has to tell Jack that his dad has had a heart attack, never once does she say, "I'm sorry," or try to comfort him. She just makes sure that he has the story straight so that she's not caught and she can continue doing this absolutely ridiculously, insanely manipulative grooming of young boys. She doesn't even really care that Jack is gone. All she cares about is satisfying her needs and desires, and she manages to do that with victimizing another young boy. This kid named Boyd has a really different home situation than Jack does, so they can't ever go to Boyd's house, and they obviously can't go to her house, so they end up going to Jack's empty house and having sex in his bed. And this goes on for, I think, a couple months, until one day Jack walks in on them. And this is a kid who is ravaged by grief, thinks he's at fault for his dad's death, and is also being abused by this woman. And he sees her having sex with another boy, and he throws the boy to the ground, where he smashes his head and starts bleeding everywhere. Then Jack runs, and Celeste runs after him, fully naked, into the street with a knife, covered in the other kid's blood. But she doesn't catch up to him, and Jack calls the police, and she's taken into custody. And the first thing the officer says to her after she gets into the interrogation room is, "We know what you're doing with these boys. What we need to know is if you were intending on killing Jack when you ran out of the house following him with a knife." And so she ends up going to trial. Obviously, her husband divorces her. And at this point, as the reader, while she's waiting for the trial on home arrest in this like dingy little apartment, you are thinking, thank God. Like, finally, this vile, monstrous woman is facing some consequences for her actions. But because she is white and pretty and young, the magnitude of her punishment does not match the magnitude of her crime or the harm that she's caused. She ends up playing it really well in court and getting some plea deal or something. She's sentenced to like 4 years probation. She moves away and can't go within 1,000 yards of a school. In some ways, it ruins her life because she doesn't live this luxurious life living off of her husband's family's money. But mostly, she still gets what she wants, which is to be able to victimize more boys. She just does it somewhere else. So it is not necessarily a satisfying ending. It is kind of a sickening ending. I don't know. It sort of plays it both ways because you are so frustrated that she still gets to do what she wants to do, but you also know that her life is significantly worse than it was, and that all of her luxury has been taken away from her, and she's a very vapid woman, so you know that this does hurt her. I really liked the kind of over-the-top way that this dealt with the politics of attractiveness during, like, the trial and in the justice system. Like, her lawyer tells her they're just talking about mascara. Like, they're constructing who she's going to be in court and what she needs to look like in court. She says, if your mascara clumps on you at this trial, it's like she's guilty. You know what I'm saying? You can only use the lightest kiss of it, but that tiny amount will also make all the difference in the world. Like, that's insanity. And it's not necessarily far from the truth, as far as I know. If Celeste was just a little bit uglier or a little bit older, she would not be able to get away with any of what she gets away with. What she would lose if she looked like them, if that makes any sense. I loved the way that this dealt with attraction and desire and beauty. I think this book is absolutely audacious. She committed so hard to this character, and it's vile and disturbing and awful, and people have reviewed this really poorly because of the subject matter, and I think that she was so brave to write this, because of course there are lots of people that were going to respond in that way. To write something so controversial like this, I think, was fearless of Alyssa Nutting. Also, talk about nominative determinism. That's if this subject matter is something that you can deal with, I would highly recommend this. This is one of the most fantastically written books that I've ever read in my entire life. But if you are even a little bit unsure, skip it. Because, like, wow. It is vividly erotic and in the way that it details abuse. This really felt like the perfect example of a hateable narrator. There's nothing redeemable about this woman, and she is perfectly constructed. It doesn't feel cheap. It feels like a very realistic portrayal of what someone like her might be like. And it's so compulsive reading this and being inside her head and seeing what kind of crazy fucking shit she's going to do next to try to get away with her disgusting, perverted needs. 10 out of 10. Great book. I loved hating her. She was perfectly written. The next book I've decided to read is A Touch of Jen by Beth Morgan. I'm only like 50 pages into this so far. It's very different than Tampa in terms of like literary quality, but I don't think that's a bad thing about this book. I think this book is like quite a bit fluffier and much easier to read, both in subject matter and also in the writing. Like, the writing is very, very simple and readable in a way that I need after Tampa. I'm fucking tired. So A Touch of Jen is written in third person, which I don't have a problem with, but I can't remember the last time I read a book in third person, and it kind of like took me out of it for a second. It really follows this couple, Remy and Alicia, Is that her name? Oh my god. And Remy used to work with this woman named Jen before the restaurant or bar or wherever they worked closed, and he is obsessed with her, and he has passed that obsession off onto Alicia. So both of them obsessively like stalk her social media, talk about her constantly. Alicia sometimes pretends to be her. It's like part of their sex life. They think about this woman a lot and they project a lot onto her. I think I said before that Jen is a social media influencer, and I don't think that's true. I think that she is kind of just a random woman from Remy's past. They didn't date, and they weren't even that close of friends. They hadn't seen each other in 2 years until the events of this book, where they run into each other at an Apple store, and Jen's like, you should come surfing with us. Like, all the old people from the restaurant that we worked at, we're all going surfing together, and you never come out for drinks or whatever with us. We've all kept really close, and you've been so distant. Like, come on. And Remy's like, I'm absolutely not doing that. And Alicia's like, we're doing that. And she goes behind Remy's back, and she plans it. Where I've got to right now, which is part 2, I think begins with them going on this surfing trip with Jen and her friends. They have really created Jen to be this, like, huge thing in their minds, and I think that they have made a lot of assumptions about who she is and what she's like that are not going to hold up when faced with the real human being. Alicia and Remy both are absolutely hateable characters in a really like fun and realistic way. It feels like they're miserable in the way that people are miserable. Like, I think that I could know these people. I kind of feel like I live with one of these people. That's how like true this is to real life in terms of the unlikableness of the characters. I don't know them very well yet because I'm only 50 pages in, but so far Alicia seems to be this very kind of superstitious person, a very anxious person who just decides things are true and then they become true in her head in an annoying way. And then Remy is kind of an arrogant asshole who thinks that he's right about everything constantly. And oftentimes both of them are right about something, and they're both being annoying about it. It seems like they're both cranky all the time, and little things will send them over the edge into complete misery. It doesn't seem like they like each other very much, but they're kind of just drawn together by this shared obsession with Jen. And I don't think anything is going to go well for these characters. And I'm really enjoying reading about their frustrating habits and communication styles. I think that they're so incredibly fun to hate because they like feel like a person. Like, they feel real. Whereas in Tampa, like, that it definitely felt like you were inside the head of someone who was a genuinely real human being, but it didn't feel like someone you yourself would ever know, I guess. Or because of the point of view, it really changes how you interact with it in a way. Like, this is a third person, so it's telling me about these people in a way that I might be able to experience. Like, it almost feels like observations I would make if I was near them, whereas Tampa is first person and it's fully in the head of Celeste, so it's not like things that you would necessarily know if you knew her as a person, and she obviously hides all of her weird perversions. I'm just finding this to be a much more fun and light read than Tampa was. Sometimes I read like the first sentence of reviews because I don't want to get spoiled, but I do want to know what people think. And it seems like the second half of this is going to be very different from the first half. And I'm thrilled to know what happens. And I'm going to go read it. Goodbye. I finished A Touch of Jen. It was so wild and so fun. Where I left you off, they had left to go on this surfing trip with Jen and her friends. The important people on the trip are Jen and then obviously Alicia and Remy, but also Carla, who worked at the same place as Jen and Remy did and knows both of them, and then Horace, who is Jen's boyfriend, and he's kind of like the good guy in this story. So easygoing, so personable, so agreeable, and obviously this really, really, really irritates Remy. For this entire trip, Remy is absolutely miserable, and of course he is. That's just his fucking personality. This trip did warm me to the character of Alicia a little bit. I realized that she's really just, like, kind of annoying and kind of cringy and needy. Nothing that should be, like, punishable by death. I kind of just pitied her instead of, like, disliking her in the visceral way that you dislike Remy when you're reading this. Throughout this trip, Alicia really just wants to be accepted by this group of friends, and particularly by Jen, who she is kind of obsessed with, and in her mind, kind of competing with, but not in like a nasty way, just in a way where Alicia feels really insecure. And when she's finally starting to feel kind of like one of the girls, she sleepwalks one of the nights and chokes Jen while Jen is sleeping. And this turns everything around. This makes Jen very, very rude to Alicia the entire time, completely pushes her out of not only the inner circle, but just like the entire group. She doesn't want anything to do with Alicia anymore. Horace is a surfing instructor, and he's teaching everybody on the trip how to surf. And Alicia takes to it immediately and absolutely loves it, but Remy cannot surf at all. And he's, of course, again, miserable because of this. On the third day that they're surfing, I think, he finally catches a wave, but then he feels patronized by another surfer who gives him a thumbs up. So he purposely crashes into him and kind of gets a concussion. Mostly he's just playing it up, though, but it means that him and Jen go stay at the house that they're staying at while everybody else is out surfing. And while they're there, the two of them make out. And this making out, coupled with the sleepwalking, choking incident, makes everything fall apart, and everyone hates each other and yells at each other, except the couples aren't mad. Like, Horace and Jen have some sort of open relationship, and Alicia does not ever seem to be upset at Remy for cheating on her, but Jen hates them and they hate Jen, and that's how the trip ends. Once they get back from this trip, Alicia starts really trying to embody Jen, not in this joking way that she had been doing before she had ever met Jen, but like truly trying to become her. She ends up getting a new job where she makes all of her coworkers call her Jen. She wears a sweater that she stole from Jen all the time, buys earrings from Jen's shop. Like, she's really trying to be her much more in the way that she speaks to people than in how she portrays herself, even though she is trying to portray herself outwardly, like physically as Jen. She's really like talking like her. And she is sort of, I guess, sorting through all the insecure, terrible feelings that she has because of the way Jen was treating her by treating other people in the exact same way, using the exact same words Jen used against her. And then on the other hand, Remy keeps seeing this weird, like, face that he can't fully get a good grasp on what it is or what's happening, but he's having these kind of weird experiences. One of them being on the night where Alicia sleepwalks, and then the sleepwalking thing totally overtakes what he thinks he sees out by the pool. And then another time he's in a bar with Jen and he sees this face in the bathroom near him. It's really just these little sprinkles, but it was giving me hope that this book would get weird. And it does get weird, and I loved it. While trying to be Jen, Alicia is also building this sort of sensory deprivation chamber with a hot tub that she's bought off this guy, and then a wooden frame that she builds around it that she can cover up so it's completely dark in there. And she builds this in their apartment, and I think she goes in there and becomes Jen more thoroughly each time she enters this chamber. Finally, one day she runs into Jen. Jen comes into her new job and realizes what she's doing. It's very obvious when the employees call Alicia Jen, and it totally freaks Jen out. But Alicia doesn't really seem to care that much. But that same day, Alicia doesn't come home from work, and Remy is waiting, not really anxiously, until the police show up and tell him that she's dead. And he honestly has no reaction to this, but it doesn't really seem like a Remy thing. Like, it doesn't really seem like he's just being a dick. It seems like he is in some sort of shock. He goes down to, I mean, he is still being a dick. He's a dick to the police officers, 100%. But he goes down to the hospital, and he is certain that there's just been a mix-up and that she's not actually dead. And they tell him, oh, there has been a mix-up. She is in this room. But it's just a woman with the same name as her, and she is dead. He ends up seeing her body and identifying it, and still, he doesn't feel like this is real, and he feels like there is some sort of mix-up that's happened. He ends up going through the motions of grieving her without ever really accepting her loss or experiencing any upset or grief. Remy is noticing that he's not all that upset by Alicia's death and more just confused by it, but he's also kind of losing his grip on reality. He ends up being attacked by this creature whose face he's seen a couple of times in the past. He manages to fight off this creature and it disappears, but he has no idea what is going on. So he calls Carla, who is his old friend from work, but mostly just Jen's friend that he went on the surf trip with. And Carla believes in a lot of stuff, and he thinks that she will believe what he tells her. And she does, because she has read this book that has been the most boring part of A Touch of Jen. It's kind of this like psychedelic spiritualism thing that everybody reads and everybody talks about, like signs in your life and destiny and all the language that this like kind of pop sci book has created. And it's very easy to skim the parts that are about it until it becomes super important in this last third. Carla says, I know what's happening, I know who to call, and she ends up calling the author of this very popular book, who comes and does a couple of like rituals and tells Remy what is going on with this creature. I still don't entirely get it because, like I said, I was skimming the parts about this book in the beginning of the book because I thought it was a little bit boring. I didn't realize it was going to be so vital to the end of the story. She tells him that this creature is some manifestation of someone in a different timeline than his who's trying to stop him from obtaining his ultimate destiny and like reaching the consummate reality or something like that. The consummate result, which is what his entire life is supposed to lead to. He's supposed to, if he's really present and in the moment, see all of these signs around him that point him towards the consummate result. And this creature is working against him and trying to kill him before he can reach that result. But he doesn't know what his end destiny is supposed to be. He's this miserable dude who's just been in his own head and angry about everything for his entire life. He's never in the moment until at one point, which I think is the best part of the book, he finally realizes what all of the signs are pointing him to. And he goes through all of these little things that have happened in the book that he is now taking as signs. And as you're reading this paragraph of signs that he's come up with, you're realizing what he's about to do. And it's so insane and so well done. He decides that he needs to kill Horace, that that's the way to get together with Jen, and that him and Jen as a couple is his destiny. It's his consummate reality. So he goes over to Jen and Horace's place, and he lets all these signs lead him there. He takes everything as a sign that this is the right thing to do. And he leaves in his wake a path of death and destruction and horror. And he gets to Jen's house, and he doesn't expect her to be there. He expects it to just be Horace there, but it's only her. And it ends with him realizing he was wrong, that he wasn't supposed to kill Horace, that he was meant to kill Jen, and that this monster, this creature that's been following him, is some manifestation of Jen from a different timeline, trying to stop him from killing her. So he kills her, which stops this creature, kills the creature as well. He ends up shoving her into a suitcase and taking her back to his place, where he puts her into Alicia's sensory deprivation chamber that she's made. And the very end of the book, it ends with Jen's body transforming into Alicia and coming out of the chamber. It is so fucking weird. It's such a crazy turnaround from the start that really felt like pure literary fiction about insufferable people and parasocial relationships, and I thought it was so fun. I think that it's certainly not everybody's taste, because it really does play with genre. Like, there are two very distinct genres in this book, but they're ones that I love with my whole heart. So it really worked for me. I thought this was fun and interesting to read. I loved hating these characters so much. I love how you can tell when they're feeling insecure and they lash out. Like, Remy is constantly putting people down when he's feeling bad about himself, or anytime either of them feels slighted, especially for something that rings true and like they are called out for something, they'll text each other like, wow, that was so bitchy. I can't believe she talked to me like, she really didn't need to talk to me like that. Like, they set themselves up as this superior being. Like, they act like they're taking the high road and other people are rude to them, when it's often people responding to their rudeness or their terrible behavior. They were incredibly written and so fun. I loved the weird dialogue in this. It felt very real reading it, but then if you take a step back, it seems like a little bit over the top, but again, in a way that was really fun. I just thought that this was a romp throughout. It was a very fun book, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm happy that I read it. Next, I'm going to be reading one of the books that I don't want to read. So I think I'm going to start with reading the first 50 pages of Norwegian Wood, and if I feel like I want to keep going, I will. And if I feel like I'm really hating it, I'll then turn to reading the first 50 pages of The Catcher in the Rye, and then if I feel like I really want to keep going there, I'll do this one instead. If I really don't want to read either of these books, I'm just not going to. The video will be long enough on its own. I'm just going to go to boy parts, but I have been saving it for last. I'm so excited to read this book. I don't know why I've built it up so much in my head like I have, but like, I just feel like I'm going to love it. I just feel like this is going to be my book. I'll see you at one point. Maybe when I've decided which of these I'm reading, I'll come and update you. I ended up reading Catcher in the Rye. I read about 20 pages of Norwegian Wood, and it was so boring I could not force myself to care about it. And then I picked this up, and it was a little bit sillier, and also it had quite short chapters, which I really appreciate in a book that has no fucking plot like Catcher in the Rye does. I'm not going to tell you really what happens in this book because I can't, because nothing happens in this book. I have finished this since we last spoke, and I am ready to kill John Lennon. And I kind of think I have an unpopular opinion about this because I don't really have strong feelings either way. This is a very polarizing book, and I feel like I just feel neutral on it. I just don't really care. Right off the bat, immediately, my first thought was that this kid narrates as if it was Ramona from Ramona and Beezus if she were, like, a miserable 17-year-old boy. Like, listen to this. I wasn't supposed to come back after Christmas vacation on account of I was flunking 4 subjects and not applying myself and all. Tell me that doesn't sound like some Beverly Cleary shit. The writing in this is kind of stylized to show Holden's immaturity and youth. It's all goddamn this, goddamn that. There's a lot of like phonetic spellings that typically in dialogue that are a little bit fun. This just follows Holden after he's kicked out of his all-boys private school because he's failing everything and he's not applying himself, and he gets into a fight with his roommate and he decides to leave early before Christmas break starts, but he doesn't want to go back home because he doesn't want to get in trouble with his parents because they don't know that he's been kicked out yet. So he kind of just floats around New York City, meeting up with old friends and old teachers and trying to kill time before going back to his parents' house. Truly nothing happens. Like, there is no arc, there's no climax. It is a very boring book plot-wise, and I was certainly bored for some of it. I don't think I was bored through all of it. I think that the first half was fun. Then it gets, like, really fucking repetitive, and the end, honestly, I was bored. I was on the brink of skimming it. It's like, okay, let's just get to the point. I feel like this could have been a bit shorter than it was. Holden goes on a lot of like meandering side tangents. It does feel like you're in the head of a kid who can't really pay attention to anything, but is also obsessed with like the minutia of life. He hates everything almost indiscriminately. He hates just like the most random things like cheap looking suitcases or people saying the word grand. But he also hates like absurdly specific things like dancing in public with children, or when people say good luck to him when he leaves somewhere. He is a miserable loser. He is so irritable and so dramatic, and he over exaggerates everything, and he can be like quite sarcastic, and he's very immature, and it feels like you're reading about this teenager. Like, it really does feel like a teenager with such limited life experience, but who thinks he knows everything and can like make these grand statements and overgeneralizations. Like, it's so ridiculous, but it's also so relatable. And like, yeah, like, I was a fucking idiot when I was a teenager. Like, weren't we all miserable idiots when we were teenagers? He is so moody and so angry at everything, really for no reason other than like his brother died when he was young, and he's definitely still grappling with that, but I don't think that you can use that to write off all of his behaviors or feelings about the world. He's just like an angry dude. Like, that's what being a teenage boy is in a lot of ways. This is certainly one of the most readable classics out there. I found the language to be so accessible and so easy to just breeze right through. It felt like this could have been written recently, other than like all the smoking everywhere you can possibly smoke a cigarette. It does feel very modern in its use of language, which made me really understand why this is something that is so often taught in high schools. I think if I was taught this in high school, I would hate it with my entire heart because it's so fucking boring. I can't imagine how boring this would be as a book that you are forced to read for a high school English class. I think I had a little bit of fun with it because I was reading it of my own volition and because it was more accessible than I was expecting it to be. So it was a bit better than I was anticipating it was going to be. I think that it's hilarious to read the reviews for this book because it is so controversial, and I feel like people are either like 1 star, this is the worst book they've ever read in their life, and Holden Caulfield is the worst person to ever exist, and they're actually going to go kill themselves because of how terrible this book is, or it's like 5 stars, this poor kid is so misunderstood and so relatable, and all the adults in his life have failed him because they serve him beer, and he's just a grieving young kid, and even though the world hurts him, he just loves his little sister, and like, he's the hero. Both of which are crazy. Maybe the latter is a little bit more insane, because what the hell? Some of y'all like would go to bat for this kid, and I don't really understand why. I get that he is relatable. But he is just an asshole because he's a teenager. I think, like, you can really, like, I don't know. I feel embarrassed talking about this because I feel like everybody has, like, gone through all this character analysis reading it in high school, and they've had, like, many more insights about this book talking about it with, like, class discussions or, like, writing essays about it. I do, in my heart, think that Holden is like this because he's a teenage boy and he's like kind of a spoiled brat. In a lot of ways, that in itself can be relatable, and we don't need to make him this completely other thing, this like good guy hero, like underdog to relate to him. We can relate to him because he's a miserable loser asshole. That's fine. That's allowed. All in all, for me, this was a solid, like, 3.75 stars. I wish more happened in this. I think if there was more of a plot, I would have enjoyed it a lot more. And I'm kind of sad that I didn't get to see that because this was a fun little book. The dialogue's well written. The characters are over the top and ridiculous and annoying, and I liked it. And I will see you tomorrow after I have read some of the last book for this video. Okay, before I start talking to you about boy parts, I actually need to complain about something that happened to me today. I went to class, and my professor was giving us feedback on this assignment that we had done, and she was saying that she's going to show us a couple examples of, like, good work, and we're going to talk about why these two examples worked really well. I'm thinking, well, I have nothing to worry about. She's not going to show my work because I only got 70% on it. And then she did. I was the second example. Why are you putting me in your slide deck if you're only going to give me 70% on the assignment? That is unreasonable. Also, this does kind of feel like a humble brag, but I'm genuinely pissed off. I should have got more than 70%. Anyway, in other news, do you like my sweater? I bought it today kind of accidentally. My school had this like vintage market, and I was carrying this around not knowing how to pay for it because there was like a whole bunch of different vendors, and mostly it was just racks and racks of clothing, and there was no clear place to pay for things. And then a woman walked up to me and she was like, "Are you buying that?" And I was like, yes. And then I just bought it, and it's too big for me, but I kind of like it. Say that you like it. Don't say anything mean about it. Anyway, Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. I'm 135 out of like 280 pages into this. Loving it. I almost stayed up way too late last night reading it, which would not have been good because I had to get up so early this morning. I am finding it incredibly compulsive and so like witty and dark and like fun. It's just like a very enjoyable experience. So this follows Irina, who's a 28-year-old living in Newcastle in England, and it opens with her working a shift as a bartender, and a woman comes in and shows Irina a photo on her phone and says, "How old does this boy look to you?" And Irina says, he told me he was 18. He gave me his passport. He signed a consent form. Like, how was I supposed to know he was young? And the woman's like, "This is my 15-year-old son. Like, you're a pervert." And she punches Irina in the face. And Irina is then able to take a 6-week-long sabbatical because she's been assaulted at work. And the book is following kind of just like the partying that she does on this sabbatical. She is a photographer, and she takes these very sexually explicit photos of men that she scouts on the street. Nothing comes of this underage boy that she's taken photos of other than the 6-week sabbatical that she's allowed to take. She just ends up deleting the photos off of her website, and she doesn't sell prints to anyone, obviously. She ends up being asked by a gallery to be part of like a show. I don't know how the art world works, but she's gonna do some sort of show where she displays some of her photographs. So she's kind of planning what photographs she has that she wants to display at this show, and kind of looking back on her time doing this like erotica photography. While she's on this break from work, she's going to parties, she's getting drunk, she's getting high, and she's typically doing this with her best friend Flo. Flo is a very different character from Irina. Irina is cold and cruel and mean and like hardened against the world, where Flo is a little bit more bubbly, a little lighter. She's far more insecure and looking for validation from people constantly, and mainly looking for validation from Irina, because Flo is in love with Irina, even though she is either dating or engaged to a man. She openly identifies as bisexual. She does not openly identify as in love with Irina, but she does blog about it, like a lot, and thinks that this blog is secret, but Irina knows the blog, and she goes and looks at it basically anytime anything happens between the two of them. Like, if there's any change in their dynamic, or even if they just hang out, Irina looks at Flo's blog, and it's like so juicy and so cringe and like mortifying to think about. I love learning about these characters through this fucking blog. One of these parties that they go to is being hosted by one of the boys that Irina has photographed. Flo ends up leaving early and Irina stays the night, and while she's there, this boy Will attempts to assault her, and this causes quite a rift between Irina and Flo, because Flo is sort of accusing Irina of lying, and then Irina in turn accuses Flo of being at fault for this, for leaving her alone. And so right at the point I'm at, near the middle of the book, the two of them are not really speaking to each other. Though Irina is very unsympathetic towards the people around her, and she's always excited to embarrass people and feel superior to them, I do find her, out of all the books I've read recently, to be one of the more sympathetic characters. Like, I feel more sympathetic to her. I think that there is a lot of past here, and you can kind of see why she acts the way she does. Even though it's often inexcusable, there are reasons for it. She has a terrible relationship with her mother. Her mom sucks. She's an awful woman in that British way that British mothers... God, there's something about that can just be terrible. She also has been abused by many, many men in her life. A teacher when she was a kid. There's a lot there, and it makes sense why she is the way that she is. And also she has this like dry British sense of humor that is hard not to like, at least a little bit. I think that this is exploring like sexuality and desire in a very interesting way through these photographs that she's taking that kind of like, I hate to say the word because I feel like it's so overused, but like exemplify the female gaze. I think it's interesting that these photos are erotic in the way that it shows us that the erotic is based in femininity, because these are erotic and they're sexually explicit mainly because she is feminizing these men. She's putting makeup on them, she's putting them in dresses, like dressing them up in little girly outfits, putting them in feminine poses. I think that there's a lot to be explored there, and I don't think this is getting too in-depth into it, but I think that it is giving me a lot to think about that I really like. My main issue with this book is not an issue in the moment right now. I think that this is so very contemporary and so in the moment that it's in, that within like 5 years, this will be quite cringe to read. I think that it's too topical and too set in a specific time to age well. I can't imagine reading this even like just a couple years from now and enjoying it in the same way that I am now. I think that this is aging as I read it. Like, it's referencing very specific songs. The language that Flo uses in her blog is so very of a certain time period. Like, just the way she shortens things, like says V for very. Even that is like kind of a little bit outdated, like already. I think that if you want to read this book, you have to read it now. Like, you're running out of time. I have about half of the book left, and I'm planning to spend the rest of the day reading this and finish it by tonight. So hopefully I will see you later on in a very ridiculously orange room. I gotta get a new light bulb for this lamp. I'm sorry. I hate how it looks. I wish I could have finished this before the goddamn sunset. Hello, I'm here again, finally, to finish this video off and talk to you about boy parts. I enjoyed the fuck out of this. Throughout Irina's days photographing these men that she finds on the street, there's this ever constant threat of sexual violence that makes this book very tense, and it makes her act out in these really, really, really intense and violent ways. And that just kind of escalates through the book. At one point, a man comes back to her apartment to be photographed, and he pushes her up against the wall and like in an instant becomes angry and violent, and she smashes her camera over his head. And when she looks at him, she thinks that there's glass embedded in his face. And this is something that has happened before, where she had a terrible experience with a man, and she like threw her champagne glass against the wall, and she looked at him and thought that his face was filled with glass. And she took photos, and then she looked at them the next day and realized that it actually wasn't. And the same thing happens. His face is not filled with glass, but he does have a head injury, and she ends up having to take him to the hospital. She has met this guy at a Tesco, and he is named Eddie. He's very kind of soft-spoken and shy and insecure and unsure of himself. And he's a good listener, and he'll do basically whatever she says. And on multiple occasions, she assaults him, and she kind of justifies this to herself, saying, he should have stopped me if there was something wrong. Like, I didn't do anything wrong.
this was on him. Definitely not the case. She never asks for consent of any of the things that she does, and it's like really intense stuff that she's doing to him. After they have sex and she chokes him violently, like leaving these horrible bruises across his neck, she starts thinking, and we start learning and getting the pieces of why she keeps imagining glass in these men's faces. And it is because years before the events of the story, she had killed a boy who had come to her apartment to have photos taken of him. There was an altercation, he got violent. Maybe she had done something to provoke it. It's not really clear who's at fault or if there is fault or blame to lay there, but she ends up smashing a wine bottle over his head and really hurting him. And she thinks he's just gonna die, and he's like a homeless boy who she thinks no one is ever going to care about his disappearance. So instead of taking him to a hospital, she just kills him in the bathtub. And she like fully tears him to pieces and buries him throughout England. And there's never any consequences for this. She doesn't even know his name, but he's never ever reported as missing or anything like that. It almost feels to her like it didn't even happen, but she has taken photos throughout the whole process of like hurting him, killing him, and then getting rid of his body. So she knows that it was real. And things just keep escalating for her. It escalates with Eddie from Tesco, and then she goes to this gallery opening that she's been preparing all her photos for and like reminiscing on her past photography and the men that she's taken photos of. She goes to this gallery opening and she totally like embarrasses herself, doesn't care at all that she's embarrassed herself. But she does get this boy who's like a total fucking dick, like little rich kid, and she pretends they have like sort of an argument, and she pretends that she's forgiven him, and she says, "Come back to my apartment." And here she ties him up and like cuts his body up, almost cuts his nipples off. And there's no consequences for this either. He leaves, of course, and then texts her the next day being like, "Sorry, I'm not really into that kind of stuff. Like, I'm not really into knife play. It's not for me." And she's like, "I almost killed you." It seems that no matter how depraved or horrible of an act she commits, there's never any consequences. She cannot make her mark on the world. And this is like destroying her. It is the main thing in her mind is like, at what point do I have to get to leave a mark? This book is very violent, most often sexually, and it is repulsive for that. It's horrible to read, but wow, is it well done and hard to put down, even though it's also hard to stomach. I really liked the explorations of like gendered power dynamics in sex. I thought that was fascinating, and I don't think I've ever read anything like this. There's not much out there that does what this does. This is horrific, but through it all, it has a sense of humor, and it has fully fleshed out and very flawed and complex characters that I really enjoyed reading about. I felt that this was really insightful into who Irina is as a person and how she became the way she is. Like, she thinks she's better than everybody else. She thinks she's this cool art girl. But then you meet her mom and see the kinds of things that her mom says to her, and you're like, oh, that's why she's like that. Like, it kind of all makes sense. And that is a theme through all of her behaviors. You do get a lot of insight into why she does what she does. That doesn't mean that any of it is even remotely excusable, but it does make it interesting to read about, for sure, to like tie her past into what she's doing now, even when it doesn't necessarily outright tell you exactly why she's behaving the way she does. It leaves some stuff up to the reader, and I enjoy that. I also like that it's kind of ambiguous what happened with this boy that she killed. Whether she did kill him. She seems to have photographic evidence of it, but also she went to the place where she buried his skull and it wasn't there. So you're kind of left to wonder on that. It also has an ending that is not necessarily ambiguous, but it does leave something up to the imagination for sure. And I liked the ending. I think it ends really well. The whole book, honestly, was great. I still stand by my opinion that this will not age well. At one point in Flo's blogs, she says the word shooketh. That was hard to read. And I think that will only become more hard to read as the years and months and days and even hours pass. Read this as fast as you can. because it is withering away in its references and in its language. But for now, in this current moment, this was a 5-star read for me. I just enjoyed it. I don't know. I never know what to do about ratings. I think subjectively, like my experience of it, I really, really liked reading this and I had a 5-star experience. I think objectively, like the writing quality and the storytelling quality is probably closer to a 4. I don't know. I feel like everybody has a different rating system and I don't know what mine is. I think it depends on how recently I've read the book. Like if I've just finished it, I'm rating it subjectively. This was like a great collection of books. Not really including Catcher in the Rye, but I think that I learned some things from Catcher in the Rye, mostly about people who talk about it. I thought that I was going to become like oversaturated with the feeling that you get when you hate the protagonist that you're reading about, but I really didn't. Like I think that they were all hateable in different enough ways that it remained fun for me throughout doing this, and I still hold the opinion that it's so fucking fun and so interesting to read about someone, particularly from the perspective of someone who you really dislike and who has like a thought process that differs from yours so greatly. I just had the time of my life. This was a really fun video to make. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.